First of all, welcome to everyone. It's great to see so many faces out there. I don't know about the rest of you, but since the holidays, I've felt like I've been kind of in an igloo here with just my wife and I and her family, and just not seeing a lot of people. It's great to have faces and people smiling on the other end, especially those that are involved with the Gundalow. So you're with us tonight for the first of our virtual Gundalow gatherings this year. And I feel like we've all become somewhat of Zoom experts over the last year. But technology always has a way of creeping in and upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. So we're hoping that this evening we won't have any technical issues. Hopefully the technical gremlins will stay away. Before we get started, I just have a few updates that I want to provide about the Gundalow company and what's going on and what's going to be coming up here in the next couple of months. The staff is preparing right now for what we would call a regular sailing season. Some of the dates for our events and the season are still being worked on, but hopefully by the time we get closer to May, we'll have those dates ironed out. For right now, the sailing season is going to start on Memorial Day weekend, which I believe is the 29th of May. And then our summer camps are scheduled to start on June the 28th. I will provide you with a quick update on the summer camps. We opened up registration several weeks ago, and we're now over $45,000 in camp registrations, and several of our camps have sold out several times over. So we're doing really well there, and we're excited about having a somewhat normal camp season. Unfortunately, because of COVID, very few schools have signed up for school programs with us on the Gundalow. It's probably not going to recover in that respect until the fall when we have the vaccinations going. But to make up for that, we are going to continue the fall programs that we had in September, October, and November in the springtime. But right now we don't have a start date yet, and we don't have those open for registration. We're hopefully having those open for registration in the next couple of weeks. That program we have a name for now. It's not just the fall program or the spring program. It's called the River Classroom. And there are all sorts of offerings for the students in the area. So we're hoping we'll be able to give them opportunities to learn some more things about the rivers and the bays here. We've had to cancel several of our events, our in-person events. Gundalow gatherings, which we're normally having in April, obviously we're not having this year. We're doing them virtually. Riverfest, which is typically scheduled the first weekend of June, is also going to be canceled because of COVID. We are going to hold Round Island Regatta. We've pushed that out to the 7th of August. And right now we're planning to make that particular event a tribute to Charles Lasson, who along with his wife Suki used to own Round Island. For those of you who may not know, Charles passed away late in 2020. And so we're going to have a tribute Round Island Regatta in his name. Just a quick update on some of the virtual Gundalow gatherings we have coming up. On the 8th of March, on the 4th of March, excuse me, we have a virtual tour of New England lighthouses that's going to be done by Jeremy D'Entremont. The 25th of March, we're going to change gears a little bit and have a science cafe called Water Over the Dam, which is going to be about beavers and their interaction with humans here in this area. On the 1st of April, we're going to have an evening called All Things Oysters, where we're going to have folks from the Nature Conservancy tell us a little bit about the oyster conservation that they're doing in Great Bay and Little Bay. And then they're going to be joined by the folks from Virgin Oysters, and we're going to learn a little bit about how to shuck oysters and, of course, what you can do to make them more palatable to eat. On the 28th of April, we have an evening. This was just confirmed today. We're having an evening with Evan Mallett, who's the head chef at the Black Trumpet. According to Dee, our development coordinator, she said that Evan is working on a specialty drink for that evening called Gundalow Grog. So we'll look forward to that. And hopefully, or maybe we'll even get a cooking lesson from Evan that evening. So that's what's coming up. And then the last thing I have is it's very tentative right now, but it looks like the 6th of May, we may have a presentation by the New Hampshire Black Heritage Trail folks. So that's what we have planned for Gundalow, the virtual Gundalow gatherings and science cafes going in to this year. Before I introduce our speakers, I just want to go over a couple of ground rules. I'm going to have everybody muted during the presentations to limit background noise so that things don't get interrupted there. You'll remain muted until we get to the question and answer session. And then if you have a question, you can raise your hand or send me a note in the chat room, and I'll unmute you and allow you to ask that question directly to our speakers. If you do have a question that you want to ask, please type it into the chat section. If you look at the bottom of your screen, if you're not familiar with Zoom, there's a little icon that looks like a bubble, and underneath it is the word chat. If you click on that, a little window will appear in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and you can type in your question and then hit the send button, and we'll get it there in the chat room. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the speakers, so bear with me for a second. Joining us tonight, again, I was talking with them prior to everyone joining and noted that last year our first virtual Gundalow gathering was with the folks from Blue Latitudes, and we're starting off the season this year again with them as our first guests. Our first speaker is Emily Hazelwood, and Emily is the co-founder of Blue Latitudes. She's a marine conservation biologist, oil and gas consultant, and explorer. She has a BA in environmental science from Connecticut College and an MAS degree in marine biodiversity and conservation from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Our next speaker is Amber Sparks. She's a co-founder along with Emily of Blue Latitudes, and Amber is an oceanographer, environmental scientist, and entrepreneur. She has a BA in marine science from UC Berkeley and an MAS in marine biodiversity and conservation from Scripps Institution of Oceanography as well. Both Emily and Amber, as co-founders of Blue Latitudes, were recognized on Forbes 30 Under 30 list in the energy sector in 2018 for their work with Blue Latitudes to develop sustainable, creative, and cost-effective solutions for the environmental issues that surround the offshore energy industry. I'm going to put a link to their webpage that has a little bit more of their background and their bios. So please feel free to click on that and read some more about all the accomplishments of Emily and Amber. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to them. They're going to start off with a presentation and follow that with a video. And after that's over with, we'll open up for questions. So Emily, Amber, take it away.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Emily Hazelwood.
And I'm Amber Sparks.
And we are thrilled to be here this evening, to be back visiting you all at the Gundalow Foundation virtually. And we're going to be kicking things off this evening with a presentation that'll give you a little bit of a deeper dive, literally and figuratively, into our most recent research expedition to the Kingdom of Tonga. So I will share my screen here.
Yeah.
Okay, can you all see that? Just maybe wave or give me a thumbs up. Great. So our most recent research expedition took place in the Kingdom of Tonga. And today we're going to be speaking with you about swimming with humpback whales and exploring the function of ecotourism in the Kingdom of Tonga. But first, a little bit about our nonprofit foundation, the Blue Latitudes Foundation. We are a nonprofit organization founded at the end of 2018, and we seek to elevate the traditional concept of ocean stewardship by uniting government, industry, and the community to work together to conserve our oceans. Now, we chose to go to the Kingdom of Tonga because there's a unique relationship that exists here. One amongst the Tongan people and the humpback whales that call that area home during the breeding season. What's unique about Tonga is that the Tongan people actually used to hunt these humpback whales, but have since shifted and now conserve these whales, and is one of the only places in the entire world where you can actually get in the water and swim with these whales. Now, we chose to explore what this relationship looks like in Tonga because we wanted to understand the function of ecotourism there. Was this actually benefiting the Tongan people, and was it actually benefiting the humpback whales? So we'll be taking a little bit of a deeper dive into that issue, but here's a little bit of a video of one of the baby humpback whales that got a little bit too close to our cameraman during our research expedition.
I love that video. It really takes us back into being in the water with these magnificent creatures, and our film will definitely show a lot more of that amazing footage. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, where is Tonga? Tonga is a unique island community that's just in the South Pacific, north of New Zealand, south of Fiji. It's a very unique place where humpback whales have actually been coming to breed and raise their young for many, many, many generations. There are warm, shallow lagoons that are perfect to act as a nursery ground for these whale calves and their moms to come in and really spend some time here. So this was our location and where we decided to do our expedition. Now, as peaceful and beautiful as those creatures are, the history of the Kingdom of Tonga is not necessarily one of peace and tranquility. For many years, these whales were actually hunted by the local Tongans, and they would use traditional sailboats like this one right here. A whole community would board this boat and go out hunting these humpback whales. And the meat, the oil, and the money that they would get from selling the products of the whales would sustain those communities around the entire year. So this was a really important factor of their life. It provided and sustained their livelihood.
However, there's been a generational and unique shift in Tonga. Because the humpback whales, they actually generally have a lifespan similar to that of a human adult. They can live up to 70 years old. What we've seen is that the grandchildren of these whales that were once hunted are now those that are frequenting the water of Tonga. And the people that have now shifted towards conservation are the grandchildren of those that once hunted these whales. And it was this generational shift that we wanted to better understand.
Our purpose in Tonga was to assess the sustainability of this ecotourism practice in Tonga. Our team was comprised of Explorers Club members, filmmakers, photographers, and of course our local guides. And our purpose was to really ask these big questions, talk to the locals, and film our experience.
When we traveled to Tonga, we were seeking to answer several key questions. We were on a mission to understand how sustainable and profitable the ecotourisms in Tonga were. And we also wanted to understand if, given the fact that they'd seen such a significant increase in tourism, was this resulting in a significant increase in plastic pollution? And finally, we wanted to better understand who was actually benefiting financially from these operations. Was it actually the Tongan people and the whales, or were there foreign entities coming in and taking over these practices?
In the field, our expedition really focused in on 3 major surveys. The first being acoustic sampling. We were listening to the sound of the whales underwater and recording it not only to supplement into our film, but to try and understand if the increased vessel traffic associated with the ecotourism was impacting the whale songs and their ability to communicate. We also conducted microplastic sampling. This was a part of a larger research initiative spearheaded at Scripps Institution of Oceanography under the Dehane Lab. Microplastics are ubiquitous in our environments. We see them in the snow-capped mountains of Antarctica, all the way to this very remote island in Tonga. These microplastics can be found in most, if not all, of our water sources. So we were taking samples and looking to quantify what the impact of the plastic pollution was here down in Tonga. And lastly, we conducted social surveys. This was perhaps one of the most interesting and revealing parts of our expedition, learning from the locals about how ecotourism has impacted their lives and their livelihood. And some of these social surveys were actually recorded and incorporated as part of our video.
The last component of our assessment was a desktop analysis using Geographic Information Systems, or GIS. And this map was generated using publicly available data that was collected back in 2014. And it depicts our study area on the island of Vava and the surrounding waters as well. And so what this map shows you is reference sites, which were located in Funalia and Toku. And these are uninhabited islands that are located approximately 40 nautical miles away from Vava. That's the pullout map in the upper left-hand corner. And we wanted to use those as reference sites because they are uninhabited, and they would definitely show us a difference, we thought, between the islands of Vava in terms of coral cover and fish richness as compared to these uninhabited islands. This map shows us fish richness, which is the number of fish species, as well as coral cover. And essentially what we found is that looking at the data, we saw that both fish richness and coral coverage was comparable between the islands of Vava and the reference sites. This surprised us. We expected that because of the increase in ecotourism, that we would see a decrease in coral cover just because of the increase in activity from humans and boats. But that was not the case, which was demonstrative of the fact that the Tongans were doing a good job protecting their marine ecosystems that surrounded the island chains.
Another reason that the fish and coral health in our study area could have retained its resiliency and health in the face of increasing tourism is because tourism in Tonga was really only increasing gradually over time, especially when compared to other South Pacific nations like Japan and New Zealand that are represented by the orange and gray lines on the right-hand side of that graph. You can see that they have an exponential increase in tourism between 1990 and 2017 versus Tonga, which is the red line, has only had a relatively gradual increase. Now, this gradual increase could be seen as both a positive and a negative. On one hand, the slow development and rate of growth in tourism meant that there were manageable impacts on our coral health and fish health. But it's negative because now the people are starting to depend on ecotourism as a way to fund their lifestyles. And if it's only increasing gradually, they might have to look elsewhere for employment to help supplement their income.
So the results we found were not so clear-cut. We identified several opportunities, including a steady increase in tourism, which we considered to be sustainable. It promoted whale conservation, which is always a good thing. And it also provided a source of low impact income, meaning it was providing Tongans with a source of income that wasn't negatively impacting the surrounding environment. And it was also highly regulated by the Tongan government. But there were some constraints. And one of the biggest ones was the fact that this was seasonal work, meaning that the humpback whales were only in Tonga during the breeding and calving season, which lasts about 3 to 4 months. outside of that 3 to 4 months, there really wasn't a source of ecotourism draw to the islands of Tonga. Although the islands are quite beautiful and they do have beautiful reefs for diving on, they are difficult to get to. So people were really only going there for the whales, which meant that many Tongans left the islands of Tonga throughout the other months of the year to seek out work. Their work was also highly dependent on the whales returning. And humpback whales, they're not always in Tonga. They travel the world's oceans. And during that time, they're at risk from hunting. There are still some countries that hunt humpback whales, as well as ship strikes, pollution, and other dangers that could impact them from returning to the islands of Tonga. And of course, there's the risk of overexploitation in foreign licenses. What was unique is that we found that although the Tongan government controlled the number of licenses that were given out, not all those licenses were actually owned by Tongans. Many of those licenses were owned by foreign entities, which meant that the Tongan people weren't able to profit from this ecotourism as much as they could be.
So as we left the islands of Tonga, we had some remaining questions. How can Tonga increase sustainably while limiting their impact on the environment? And what happens if the whales don't return? And lastly, and a more relevant question today is, what happens if the tourists don't return? With the impacts of COVID-19 and a global pandemic, how has that changed the environment and the resiliency of the people of Tonga who depend on ecotourism for their livelihood? So these are some questions that we left asking, but we're also excited to kind of share with you so you can get your own perspective in our film, Faka'apa'apa.
So without further ado, we will start our film.
Kak ko kita hao. Aku fui kau pe dia aku fui ne fo o yo. Pak unu kau barangnya kau mo to fo. Kau tan ko na mau fina ko to tai mo fina ma to dia. Ni maka be tu fina mai be mai kau dah ka ni. Ne fam be fo ke ko watu. Aku nak tahu film ni aku di mau ngapa ngai ai mau tol guna mau fang mata. Betul lah vai pun kakai an mau fakal tahu dunia.
We're here on a scientific expedition with the Blue Latitudes Foundation to research and better understand the relationship between the Tongan people and the humpback whales here. We decided to come down to Tonga because here we've got this incredible ecotourism operation meeting with one of the most sensitive forms of the environment, humpback whale breeding ground, a nursery ground for these whales. So we wanted to ask the question, is that relationship actually sustainable?
The Blue Lagoon Resort, it's an eco resort, trying to minimize all the plastic, the single-use plastic. So it's a resort run by a little local family, so I'm one of them.
We are sitting at an island in Tonga, Vava at the Pacific. Tonga is a magical place. It's pretty much untouched. A lot of things you can do here.
Tonga is beautiful little country in the Pacific. So magical and good to come over and swim with humpback whales, get some kava and enjoy.
These brothers, they've been our whale tour guides essentially this whole time, driving the boats,
The baby fluke there.
taking us out to the whales, guiding us in the water with the whales, and also teaching us about the local population here. And these brothers that work and live here at the Blue Lagoon are potentially the face of the new generation of conservation here in Tonga. And they are one of the few licensed tour guides that are actually Tongan. Swimming with whales it's like being on a safari but underwater. With an animal, you're close up, they're massive, and you never really know what type of characteristics you're gonna get. Some are shy and sink to the bottom, some are super playful, come up, look you in the eye. It's a really cool experience.
Just when was my first time hopping in the water with them, you know, how gentle they are, how humongous they are, but such a gentle animal, you know.
I don't know, you gotta come and do it to know the experience. It's just mind-blowing and was pretty amazing. I was so shocked, like, whoa, so huge. You know?
The humpback whale is the size of a bus with a 3 meters long wing on the side.
And if you earn their trust, they will let you closer and closer.
And having the calf, you know, comes shooting up to the surface, and they have blue eyes and they lock eyes with you. They're watching you, and they get so close to you, but they know exactly where you are in the water, and they won't hit you. You have the sensation of, you know, being the other kids in the schoolyard, and the whale comes up to play with you before going back down to check in with mom to make sure everything's okay. And honestly, we have as much fun as the whale calf, I think. Swimming with the humpback whales here in Tonga is one of the most human interactions I've ever experienced in the natural environment. It's almost like you can relate to all the emotions that you're witnessing.
That was unreal.
What we found is that it's more complicated than we thought. Not only is ecotourism something that doesn't occur year-round, it's only when the humpback whales are here, but it's also, from that sense, not sustainable, because then you're unemployed for 7-8 months of the year.
So for our income for our now pretty much it's come from whale watching. Pretty much I would say maybe pretty much 100% out of it.
Here in Tonga, because ecotourism is so hyper-focused on the whales, and they're only here for such a short season, there are bound to be some issues that arise from that. And we went to the town of Vava to get some answers.
Our economy, especially from tourism, is very vulnerable, because if the whales don't come here anymore, what's next? Are we prepared for that? I know in the last 10 years since I've been here, there was a lot of complaints from some of the people who own restaurants and also accommodation. They said that basically what the whale watching season have done to their business is narrowing down the season to only effectively 3 to 4 months. In the early days, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, literally it was all year round for them. So what they do, they have to manage and budget to be able to operate the whole year. So a lot of the small businesses that I found around here in Vava who only operate for them, close the business, go overseas, work, and then come back, reopen.
But over here, when low season is, I go to Hunga. It's a village where my mom comes from.
In Hunga is everybody is so much caring and they respect for who you are, and everybody's so lovable there. So there's no place like Hunga for me.
A lot of the Hunga people during season or low season, they go to overseas, to Australia, New Zealand, picking fruits. They get a little bit of income there and come and help with their family in the island.
Yo na tafu fu na ko ki tanga mari ka mau to gon ka fa ngata ka ko te mo na ta ofi yo au ko mau to be ko te ngo pe ka to ka kai ne ma ka ki mau nga ki ki yo ka be ga to ne go fu finga pe ga o ga yo o ka ki ta fa nga ko me be ko va ka be ki to mo ni ar ge to fo a tai ni Fama tak ya ini. Mimi marunga pergi toko waru, awi koi pe wa toko fa be, kei fai be vanga dai. Foi vaka pe kok fai apa? Wakalahi. Ika ma bena gede fa fa kau ke hoko atu. Bagi hafu pe gua pare mai ko me bene ngari ngo fa na mata to fa ko me pe na wa na fa nga mali ai na to wi boy na iwa ka mo me no le sita ma
I can probably say there are too many licenses, all right? There are too many licenses at present, and I think there's also issues because most of the whale watching licenses are foreign owned. Very few is owned by Tongans. More, probably 70% was owned by foreigners, you know, but then this is the other side of the view. But at the same time, most of all the skippers, all the tour guide in the whale watching businesses are local Tongans.
During the season, the hard parts is everybody's out there like plenty boats. And then the hard part is you have to be there early to get the whale before some other boats on the whale. There's 23 operators and most of them have like 2 boats. It's very sad to see it because we want the whales to come every year. Like, because this is for us, our business and life, you know.
Until you finish your 1.5 hour and you think the whale will have a rest, but not, they hop straight in. And that is one of the hardest parts, just to try to give the whales a break too. You know?
More people come here for photographer and stuff like that, and they're trying to harass the whale, So I'm watching pretty much if they can stop the licensing, just cut it down, try to make it less.
Yeah, there's one word called Faka'apa'apa in Tonga. It's very important. That's one of the important things here in Tonga. Is Faka'apa'apa is respect. Like, you always, doesn't matter if you're wrong or right, you can't talk bad back to your dad or mom or somebody older than you. You know, that's how respectful here in Tonga. I do feel respect to the whales.
If the whales don't come back one year, I think that it could very easily just fall apart. I think ecotourism here is kind of vulnerable because it's only relying on one thing, and that's if the whales come.
Well, thank you, everyone. That's the conclusion of our film.
Oh, thank you, Emily and Amber. I want to remind folks, if you want to send in your questions, please put them in the chat room. I'm going to unmute some folks here as well to ask their questions. But before to start us off with, it was interesting for me to find out that a very small number of licenses are owned by the Tongan people. And I was wondering if the Tongan government is doing anything to sort of improve the odds or to limit the number of foreign licenses so that more of the Tongan people can have them.
That's a great question, and it's something they are actively working on. We were fortunate to connect with Lucy, who really manages a lot of the environmental issues amongst the islands, as well as tourism. And you know, the biggest issue that she saw is that Tonga is not just one or two islands. It's well over, I think, 50, 60 islands. So it's challenging to get all the islands together to be able to manage it in that way. And I think, you know, as with any industry, you know, whale hunting was only banned in the late 70s. So this ecotourism concept is relatively new. So they're still adapting to what that means for the islands and what's the most sustainable way for them to be able to make income, because they do make income from the foreign licenses. And what's challenging is if you're a local Tongan, you need to have the money to purchase the license, purchase the vessel, and also, you know, have the accommodations to bring folks out there. A lot of these foreigners that come in have the money to do that. So it makes it challenging to compete with that. So it's something they're aware of and they're actively working on, but it can be challenging.
That actually leads me to another question. So you said whaling was banned in the late 70s, and prior to that, what were the older generations of Tongans hunting whales for food? Were they hunting whales for food and byproducts that they could take from the whale and then sell? You know, because, you know, thinking of the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries when whaling was, you know, done to collect the oil, there's no really need for oil from, you know, whales anymore. So what was it you know, they were using the whale harvest for?
Yeah, so the Tongan people used every part of the whale. So the meat, the bones, the oil, the blubber, all of it was of value to them. And if you can believe it, there's somebody who's willing to buy that product all around the world. So they were able to, whatever they didn't keep for themselves or for the village, they would sell. And that was the main way that they generated income for themselves and for the communities there.
Great. I got a question from Hutch. Hutch, if you'll unmute.
Hi.
There you go.
Thank you. No, I think someone mentioned about sharks on the chat. We were wondering about the danger of swimming with the whales.
The whales themselves were surprisingly incredibly gentle. I feel like I was blown away by, I mean, I felt clumsy in the water. They were the ones that were just graceful and knew exactly where you were. They would come, especially the babies. The babies are the ones you mostly see in those videos because they're so incredibly curious. They'll come right up to you and they stick their pectoral fin out, and the only way they would touch you is if you were the one that moved. They had this sense of exactly where you were. You know, they had some rules in terms of making sure that you stayed safe with the whales, which was principally so that the mom wouldn't feel that you were threatening her baby. You know, they didn't want you swimming over top the whales. They didn't want you chasing the whales, things like that, that would make the mom become more protective. But if you respected those rules, they were incredibly gentle, and I never felt fearful once.
Okay, Dee?
Hi, Emily and Amber. Thank you again for coming, this year, and I really appreciate it so much. So my question to you is kind of twofold. How do you mentally and physically prepare yourself for doing what you did, and then mentally and physically prepare yourself for coming back into reality? It's like you're leaving one reality, heading to another, and then having to transition again. So I just wonder what if you have any kind of rituals or superstitions or physical or do you eat differently? What do you do to get yourself where you're going, and how do you get back?
Oh man, that's such a good question. And it is interesting to travel to such a remote area of the world and find people just like me, but who are living completely different lives. And yet, we have so many things in common. We find the same things funny. We are, able to connect. And the thing that I always enjoy about doing these expeditions is connecting with the local people there and finding our common grounds, even though we are so different. And so in the case of this expedition to Tonga, that common ground was a love and a respect for the natural environment. That word Faka'apa'apa, we ended up saying it quite a lot on the trip because we realized how important that was and how that was really the root for them of why they've gone into ecotourism and why they want to protect these whales, is because they respect and cherish their natural environment, which is something that, I can definitely share that same feeling. So being able to connect with them was a really great way to ease in to that experience. And as far as coming back to reality, I think having a project like this where we could go through, we came back, it was a short field expedition. We were only gone for a couple weeks. So you come back and we have a ton of field data to go through, and then the creation of the film, follow-up reports. So we were constantly just diving back into our experience, reflecting on it, and then memorializing it through this film and through our research and our findings there. So that helped me kind of transition back into my life here.
And to add on to what Amber said, I think emotionally, whenever you travel, it's always best to just lean into the entire experience, lean into the exotic foods that you're eating, the lifestyle, what time you're waking up, the people that you're with, to really fully embrace that. Because I think, I heard this podcast once that said that you're only truly happy when you're actually living in the moment. If you're thinking about the past or if you're stressing about the future, you can't be truly happy. And that was something that struck me about the Tongans, was that how they didn't really worry about the future or the past. They were very focused on their families. They were very focused on the lives that they lived every day. And I think we really leaned into that concept. And it's something that I try to remind myself to do today, even coming back from Tonga, was that source of happiness of living in the moment with those whales. You could just feel what a difference it made with your spiritually and emotionally.
Wow, that's incredible. And one other quick question that I had, and sorry, how do you get there? Like, how do you
physically get there?
I'm getting myself from Rye to Portsmouth sometimes. Like, so how do you get there from where you are? I mean, I know you're in California, but
Yeah, it was surprisingly not as hard as I would have expected. There's a flight that you take from Los Angeles to Fiji and then Fiji to Vava. The challenge was getting back, and we learned that the hard way because once the airplane filled up with enough luggage, they just left. And so like our group got separated because they left. They said, that's it, we met the weight requirements, you got to wait. And so we had to wait till the next day, and then it's not a direct flight after that. It's not Vava to Fiji. They basically take you on a merry-go-round of all the Tongan islands before you get back to Fiji. So as long as you get there early and you follow the flight schedule, you should be fine. It wasn't as challenging as some of the other expeditions we've been on.
So any other questions for Emily and Amber?
I see a question in the comments from Kathy about how is the increasing ecotourism being monitored and regulated? And that's a really good question. It's being regulated by the Ministry of Tourism and Commerce in Tonga. So they regulate it by only releasing a certain amount of licenses a year. So you have to be a licensed operator to take tourists out. And so they give a handful of licenses each year. And that was kind of the problem we were running into, was that the majority of these licenses went to foreign owned individuals, and therefore we're taking away from providing the local community with that income. And so that's how they regulate it. And as tourists, as visitors, we also had to get, we had to make sure that we signed in and gave all of our information to the Ministry of Tourism and Commerce so that they had that information as well. So they know who's in the water with these whales.
And I see another question here in the comments. If they use the original sailboats, would it be more ecological and keep foreigners out? And what did they learn from the whale vocalizations? I mean, it definitely would be more ecological if they used the original sailboats. I think, unfortunately, a lot of that knowledge has been lost, even from the original whale hunter. I don't know if they were still using those sailboats at his time, so a lot of that knowledge has been lost. But it would, I mean, it would much less of an impact, which kind of leads into what we were listening for those whale vocalizations. We had a microphone that we were sticking into, our hydrophone we were using in the water, and we wanted to understand what the sound pollution was like there. With all the vessel traffic in the water, was that impacting the whales' vocalizations? And in this case, we actually found that the little motors they had on their boats really made no impact. The sounds that those whales make, and it's only the males that sing, and which was that kind of that grunt and sigh noise that you heard during the film, was so loud that we would be snorkeling on the reef and you couldn't see a whale anywhere, and it would be reverberating through your whole entire body. You would feel the whale songs from miles away. The females and the babies, they also vocalize, but it's actually more of a whisper. And it's a whisper, but they're still you can still hear it. But they are much quieter because they don't want other males in the area to come, because they'll jostle the baby out to try to breed with the female, and they also think it's a way of protecting them from predators. But they're extremely, extremely loud, and we're so lucky to be able to capture that for the film.
There's a couple more questions in the chat section there, if you all want to take a shot at those. And also there's Emily Burke put a listing to a study with a URL there that has to do with actually the Kingdom of Tonga and humpback whales and swimming tourism activities.
Yes, that's great. I see a question from Kevin Callahan. Is Tonga at risk for global sea level rise? And that's a great question, because small island nations are perhaps the most vulnerable and the most at risk to sea level rise, especially in places like Tonga, where they have limited infrastructure to protect their homes, their businesses that are literally built on, if not protruding into the ocean itself. So increases in sea level rise will definitely affect these communities. At this time, they're aware of that, but as Emily mentioned, they're definitely more living in the moment than planning ahead for sea level rise and building with, that kind of infrastructure in mind. So, it's sort of, we'll see how it continues or how it will impact them, but they are definitely vulnerable to those impacts of sea level rise.
What's the population of Tonga?
Well, I think it's about 170 islands or 160 islands. Majority of them are uninhabited, but I'm not sure of the population. It's small. I really honestly had not heard of the Kingdom of Tonga up until about 5 years ago. But I know it's small. I don't know the exact number.
There's also a question of do whales. Yeah. I was just going to answer that. Do whales let people swim near them in general? And not really. I would say that jumping in the water with them, it was like a 50-50 chance that they would stick around. Sometimes they would swim away and we'd have to try and catch up with them, or even get back in the boat and try and follow them on the boat, in the boat. But there were a few calves that were very curious about us in the water, and those would get near us. And as you saw in some of the footage, so close that we were almost afraid that they were going to be running into us. So and they're very playful. Usually the bigger females would always remain at a distance. And we were glad that they did, because
they're kind of like, they're kind of like people, and they all have their own very unique personalities. I'd say every single whale that we interacted with was extremely different, and the mothers were the same way. Some of the moms were so docile, they'd just sit maybe 20 feet below you while their babies did whatever. Other mothers were very hurriedly would get out of the way with their calves, and usually when that happened, we didn't swim with those, or we know to move on. But they're just like people. They each have their own extremely unique personalities.
I have a question.
I see a question. Could you hear the vocalizations above the water? No, we couldn't. I think water is very, very good at carrying sound. I don't know the actual metric for it, but water carries sound much, much farther than above the surface. So we could hear them from miles away, but you couldn't hear them above the surface besides their tail slaps.
Got a question from Nancy, who's unmuted. So go ahead, Nancy.
How far offshore did you have to go to swim with the whales? Could you see them where you stayed on the island right there? Or did you have to go in the boat and off for a distance?
Yeah, we definitely traveled a distance to actually get in the water with the whales. It was possible that they could have come into the cove where we were staying. And sometimes we didn't have to travel very far, maybe, like half a mile offshore, but they tended to be, they're very mobile. So they're moving around, and a big part of our day was looking for them, looking for a whale spout, looking for a tail flap. And that's where having the local Tongan guides who have been looking after these whales their entire life was so valuable, because they knew where to go. And they just have like a sixth sense for finding where the whales are, and definitely made for a good time.
And another question, for those Tongans who can get a license, is it even right now enough income for that family to live on for the whole year, when the tourism is only there, the whales are only there for 3 months-ish?
In general, it seemed as from the family on Vava that it was sufficient. That being said, 2 of the brothers did travel during the off season to Australia and New Zealand to work to make extra income. And of course, I don't know how much they're actually, if it's ample enough that they're saving. We've been talking with the family on Vava, because obviously this year with COVID, we always thought the big issue would be the whales wouldn't come back, but now the issue is there's no tourism. People aren't flying to Vava to swim with the whales, and nor are they able to travel to go get that extra income. And it's definitely had a significant impact on the people that live there. And it's totally unexpected, but hopefully that will start to turn around the next season.
Sue Mast had a question in the chat. Actually, two questions, I think.
What is the form of government in Tonga? Yes, and is it supportive of ecotourism overall? So the government is, so they actually are supportive of ecotourism. It's something that they're excited to have as part of their economy. And would they be likely to plan for more home-owned licenses? Well, they want to maintain only a certain number of licenses per year. And that's how they ensure that there's not an over exploitation of their resources. And I think that it's become very apparent that having so many foreign owned licenses is impacting and hurting the local communities. And so the regulators are aware of that, but it's just a matter of, can the locals actually afford the price tag of these licenses? What they're finding is that's not really the case, because not only do you have to buy the license, but then you also have to buy the boat and the facilities to house guests. And that can be really expensive, and not many of these community-based operations have those finances. So what they do rather is they get jobs as the tour guides. They come in and work for the foreign-owned company and work underneath that license. But what we found is that that's really not a sustainable way for their ecotourism to push forward and be successful in the long term. And the regulators are aware of that and becoming more and more aware of it. So I do believe they're going to be making some changes in the coming seasons.
And with regards to the type of government, they actually still have a king in Tonga. It's a constitutional monarchy, which is kind of unique. We did not get to meet the king, but there is a constitutional monarchy. I see a question. What did you eat while you were there? Did you eat a lot of fish? You know, surprisingly, we did not. What was unique about the island that we stayed on, although it was run by a Tongan family, the father, he was actually German. So we ate a lot of German meals, and we really did not eat a lot of fish at all. I actually can't really recall that many meals where we did. And there was, you know, the fishing, there wasn't as many fish. We did do some diving around there. There wasn't as many fish. You know, we didn't do a study on the actual sustainability of fishing there, but there was not a lot of fish that we observed. I know that the Tongans themselves do a lot of, you know, spear fishing and hook and line fishing. But unfortunately, we didn't get to eat that much fish. We ate a lot of German meals.
Do you have plans to go back?
Hopefully, we would love to go back. I mean, that was one of the most unbelievable trips we've ever been on as a foundation. And, you know, I think when you leave a place like that, you think you answer a lot of questions, but then you develop so many more questions after the experience, you know, is going through the data, and especially, you know, given the world today, how much it's shifted, and, you know, love the opportunity to go back there.
I see a question about, how did the trip initiate? How did we learn of this island, and were we invited as their guests? And we were not invited as their guests, not this time, but we heard about them because a fellow PADI dive ambassador travels to Fiji and to Tonga every year. And so we follow him on Instagram, and he's come in and participated in some of our other expeditions in the past. So we're good friends with him. And after seeing his trip photos and learning about his experience, we were really interested. And the trip took about 2 years to plan. So it was a big undertaking to get the funding, the resources, determine where we were going to go, what story we were going to tell. And when we got there, it evolved even more. But that's how we ended up in Tonga for this expedition.
Another question there in the chat.
What are some of the changes that they want to make in the future to make ecotourism more sustainable for the islanders? In talking with Lucy, who was interviewed during the film, she was very, very knowledgeable on this issue. And one thing that they're actively trying to do is to develop other sources of tourism such that people would want to visit the islands of Tonga beyond just the whales, which would not only, lessen the pressure on the whale season, but would also draw visitors to Tonga for all seasons. And really, there's no reason they shouldn't. The diving was spectacular, really, really unique geological formations when we were doing the diving down there. We did know that there was a presence of windsurfing down there. The problem is there's a lot of beautiful islands within that region, and that's something that they're actively working to change, such that people will come throughout the year to make that source of tourism more sustainable for the islanders.
Any other questions for Emily and Amber? Oh, got one from Joey. Joey, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Is there sailing in that area?
Yes, there is.
And what kind of sailing? Are there boats that you can charter, or do people that are major offshore sailors go there?
I would imagine, I would imagine there is. Just the presence of windsurfers that we didn't know that was such a big thing in Tonga, but people travel there because the conditions are great for windsurfing. So I would imagine similar for sailing.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions?
I see one here in the chat. Do they have a storm season? Yes, they do. And ironically, the whaling season kind of coincides with that. So I don't know if you could see in some of those videos, but the waves were massive swells. And I never get seasick, but there was a few times when we were doing, writing some notes where we'd be like, oof, I don't feel so great. Like the waves were just massive, massive. And many, many days it was just raining the entire time we were out there. The film, we try not to incorporate that, but we've got some really great videos of the 5 of us, 6 of us sitting in a boat just soaked to the bone in huge waves and rain. I think the whales go there because it's cooler then. They migrate up to Antarctica and the Arctic to feed and then when they come down here to breed, it's a little bit warmer for the calves, for the babies, and they don't eat the whole time that they're there, but it's still a little bit cooler than the other times of the year. So you do have to have a strong stomach to be able to do that and be able to put up with some of the rain for sure.
See a question of, did the bolsters go to Tonga?
So the founding director of the Gundalow company is Molly Bolster and her husband, Jeff. They're the ones I was telling you about who are in New Zealand currently. So I'm not sure if they stopped in Tonga. I don't know if Andy is still on. Andy might know. I don't
I'm
see.
looking at the map right now. I'm trying to find out. I'm trying to line up a couple maps here. I think they did. It's hard to tell because there's a lot of islands. I'll let you know if I find it.
Okay. Another question came through in the chat room from John Warner.
Did Blue Latitudes participate in a Plastic Pollution Coalition webinar recently? We did not participate in that webinar, and we're actually still waiting and working with Scripps to get the results from our plastic pollution sampling. We should have those actually very shortly. I was hoping we'd have them before this presentation so we could share with you all the results. We'd be happy to share it with you. If once you receive it, we can share it with the group here. And we're really, really interested to know what our findings are, because although the plastic pollution was not that bad on the islands themselves, more of the issue is that the plastic pollution issue in the ocean as a whole is a big problem. There's really no areas that have been untouched. But I will check out that the link that you sent over.
Yeah. And as far as the question of, do the calves nurse while in Tonga, or are they older? They are very young calves, and they do nurse while they're in Tonga. And what are the accommodations like there for tourists? they were pretty minimal, but also very comfortable. And, you know, we had warm water and a soft bed to sleep in. So, I mean, I was pretty happy with that.
David Batchelder, go ahead.
Rich, thank you. Yeah, Jeff and Molly did stop in Tonga because it's one of the stopping off points onto New Zealand, heading across the Pacific. I had the opportunity back in between 1977 and 79 to do a 2-year voyage from Maine to New Zealand, and we actually spent about a month in Tonga.
Oh, wow.
And it was actually, it was wonderful to see the film tonight, because one of the things I was looking for was how much the islands had changed. And I was happily surprised that even though there looks like there has been development, it's been very much controlled. But the time that I was there was exactly at the point where they had just stopped the harvesting of whales. And you know, I'm thinking back to the conversations and people that we met there, that this was a major transition for them, because this had been a huge part of their social structure, their livelihood, and their history. And to have the monarchy, the king, basically shut it down was a major change in their social structure and livelihood.
Wow, that must have been so interesting to be there then.
I think
another
go ahead.
Question here. Is it the mothers only that do not eat, or did I misunderstand? So the humpback whales, when they feed on plankton, they're filter feeders, they have baleen, and so they only eat once they leave Tonga. So when they migrate up to more northern or more southern waters, that's when they'll actually eat and build up those fat reserves. Kind of like, you know, when a bear hibernates, it'll build up all that fat and then hibernate and not eat. That's what the whales do. For the mothers, so that's why you actually see in those images and the videos that we have, the whales, you know, they look quite slim for a whale. And when you see those images of the whales, once they've migrated back up to their feeding grounds, they're very, very girthy. So the adults actually don't eat the entire time that they're down in Tonga. It's the calves that are nursing and feeding on those fat reserves.
Andy, were you going to, oh, there he is. Did you have some information about Molly and Jeff?
Yeah, I was just looking, it looked like they spent most of October of 2019 there. So they were just waiting for a window of time to cross over to the next stretch of islands. But yeah, it's amazing looking at their map. If you go to bolstersunderway.com is where they have their map, and it just crosses through so many tiny little islands. It's hard to keep track of them all, but they've got kind of a track that shows how they get down to the tip of New Zealand from there. Sounds like it's a place where people might have to wait for a while before they get favorable weather to continue on with longer stretches.
Yeah, I just typed in that link for folks who may not know about it. It's great to see all the pictures and some of the stories that Jeff and Molly have there on their journey. It looks like we're about out of time. I want to take the opportunity to thank both Emily and Amber for spending the time with us and sharing again this year your most current project. I think it was fascinating to learn about ecotourism in that area of the world, and had no idea that there was issues that came up because whaling was outlawed by the kingdom back in the late 70s. One thing I just want to say is that I love the title of the video, the Faka'apa'apa. That's a hard one. I love that, and I think that we could use a lot more Faka'apa'apa in this world, particularly down in Washington, D.C. And that's all I'll say about that. But thank you again. And we look forward to what your next project's going to be, and hopefully you'll rejoin us and share it with us. For the rest of the folks.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. For the rest of the folks, keep in touch with us. Take a look at our website. It has a lot of information on it. Follow us on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm going to ask everybody to unmute and give Emily and Amber a round of applause for the presentation tonight. So go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful.
Thanks, everyone. You guys are a great audience. You had really good questions.
Darling girls.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again, hopefully on the 4th of March with our virtual lighthouse tour.